Hello. Good evening. I'm waiting for my interpreter friend Alan to come on over here. Welcome, everyone. My name is Pablo De Ocampo. I'm the director and curator of Moving Image here at the Walker Arts Center. I'm going to begin tonight by just welcoming you to the Walker Arts Center and acknowledge that the Walker Arts Center sits on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homelands of the Dakota. This land, which was once an expansive marshland, held meaning for the Dakota and many other indigenous people who lived and still do live in this area. We begin many of our events, most of our events here at the Walker, by acknowledging that and pointing to where we are. I've had a couple of really interesting old other archive things that come out. We dig into kind of the history of this place and this museum in a lot of different ways when we work here. I saw two really incredible pictures recently that made me think more about the context of this place, and they're related slash unrelated. One being there's this little hill here. We're on the hillside, and this hill has slowly been graded through the settlement and the building of the city of Minneapolis. It was actually much sharper, and it had a funny name that I'm now forgetting. I was trying to think of it when I came out here, but now I completely forgot it. But it was like much more of a sharp ridge. But also that there was an armory built kind of in the what is now the sculpture garden that as the aforementioned, this used to be a marshland and still is a marshland in many ways. That armory sank into the ground. And that's funny for two. I bring these things up for two reasons. One being the way that how cities in North America and other places have been settled with like sort of a disregard for what's actually there, or this insistence on trying to make something different than what it actually is, like try to regrade a hill into something else, or this insistence that like, oh, we can kind of build on top of this march, it'll be fine. But a year later, the armory sank and they had to destroy it and take it away. Lessons to be learned from those things. We are here tonight. It's the beginning of our fall season, and I imagine you all know that it's like super fall out right now. I particularly like this time of the year, but it's like Labor Day came and it was just like, yep, summer's over. It's now going to be cool and crisp at night. And that's a great season to come inside and watch movies. This is the beginning of our fall season. Yes, thank you for coming out and watching movies. And we are really excited to kick off our season with a film called 23 Mile by Detroit filmmaker Mitch McCabe. We do a lot of different things here in the cinema, and I think everybody knows that it's a very the next couple months are kind of like there's a lot on our minds the next couple months, and this is our moment in the cinema where we're leaning very heavily into the present political moment and thinking about some context and some histories of that. And so we were very excited to invite Mitch McCabe, who will come out and say a few words in a moment, to present their new film, 23 Mile, which is, to me, a really brilliant, smart, and nuanced kind of portrait of just how complicated our country is and our populace is. It's a really wonderful, beautiful, nuanced look at a period across 2020 in the state of Michigan. A rundown for tonight. We're going to watch the film, which is 78 minutes. After the film, Mitch is going to be joined on stage by Morgan Adamson, who teaches at Macalester College, a brilliant sort of artist, but also thinker about the history of political cinema and activist cinema and what that does, and Catherine R. Squires, formerly a professor at the University of Minnesota, who has a long, deep history in thinking about political media and things like that. Be a very casual conversation. We'll have some time afterwards for questions from the audiences. So if you have them, please raise your hand when we get to that point. Morgan will let you know when we're there. And I'm going to hand it over to Mitch to say a few words before we watch the film. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and thank you to Pablo and the Walker for inviting me. It's been kind of a dream and just such an honor to be able to show my work at this amazing place. So a little bit about the film. I don't want to. It's an immersive experience, and it's about Michigan in 2020. So that's all to say. I can't emphasize enough to just breathe a little bit. There'll be more than a few moments in the film that, might necessitate that. So just a little bit of, in some ways the film was about patience. So in any case, we'll, be in discussion after the film, and hope you can stay for that. And thank you so much for coming out on a beautiful Friday night. Thank you.
Well, that was really special to watch it again on a big screen in a group of people. Thank you all for coming, and thanks so much for being here, Mitch. I think so I'm Morgan, by the way. I wanted to get started just thinking about the form of the film itself and this idea that it's a political diary. I was thinking a lot about that term and the unique kind of perspective it gives us on this moment. And in particular, I was thinking about how, feminists for a long time have been talking about the personal as political, but I think in this film, like, the political is personal, and we get this really first-person perspective on this political moment in a lot of different ways, like through, the form of, like, the film, the gestures of the camera, the typing, your voice coming in at different moments. But yeah, I was just wondering if you could just say a bit more about that idea of a political diary and how you decided on that form or that language to describe this experience and the way you put the film together.
Yeah, actually, a student asked me, like, well, is that really a diary? I'm like, well, what is a diary? I think, I forget what writer, would just basically, their diary was what they wrote every day. Or not wrote, ate every day, far less interesting. And then there was something in particular about that year that was just so punctuated by the onslaught of, observing the outside world, because, our lived worlds were so, I don't know, contained, small, right? We weren't, a lot of us weren't, going to allowed to go to the office or school or whatnot. So, and I think for me, using that terminology, especially some of my earlier short films were in the framework of sort of, personal diary, some form of that. I don't know. It seemed like being in conversation with people throughout that year was a form of, emoting and communicating, right? That wasn't just about them. It wasn't just about me. It was something that we were kind of desiring and trying to find, a common ground and discuss, because that's what we had, right? The public square, right? A lot of other avenues were kind of shut off to us that year. So to come together, if that makes any sense. I don't know.
I'm Catherine, by the way. And I'm struck thinking about the idea of diary, but then you're out in the public square. And you're out in the public square with people with really large guns at a time when you have a president, and in some cities, we saw that here, police forces who are not making a distinction between media folks, journalists, documentarians. People are getting hurt. And I was just wondered, what was it like for you to be talking to these folks who had live rounds and knowing that things were moving so fast, and how did you trust, or maybe you didn't trust, that you would be able to keep filming? I felt so nervous watching this film both times. So I'm just wondering what it was like for you to be, were you scared?
I hate to say I wasn't. I don't know. I think if it were now, yes, right? But there was something about my frame of mind. I don't think, again, there wasn't a vaccine in sight for most of, the time I was filming. We didn't know how this was going to end, right? A lot of these conversations in the film, like my my personal favorite scene, the LGBTQ Boogaloo rally. That was really like people trying to find common ground, or like, do we have allyship here if the shit hits the fan? That's what was really happening in those conversations, you know? So yes, it was always I was always filming in a public space, except for Taylor, the mustache guy, the guy with the mustache. So that maybe gave me a false sense of safety, right? Being in these more public spaces. A couple times I felt scared. There were more than a few times actually after the election I felt scared, and that had nothing to do with, you know, you don't know. I mean, if someone's open carry, and you know Michigan's an open carry state, at least I can see it, you know. And I think that a lot of times those events, there was a performative aspect to it. It almost felt like cosplay, you know, like look at this, you know what I mean? They're like comparing, you know, I don't know, what they bought. But after the election, the stakes were a lot higher, right? That scene, the Stop the Steal scene, where the guy who's playing Fuck Donald Trump, and he gets chased out, that was, I almost put my camera, I mean, it was like, what are you going to do, Mitch? You don't have anything, you know, but my adrenaline was going, you know, I felt very protective of him, and like we were together. And conveying that editorially was one of the hardest things in the film, like to at least put the viewer to get any kind of sense of the adrenaline and the fear, because I'm single camera, you know, I was, except for election day, I was all by myself. But again, I think there was something about that year for me, you know, living alone. A lot of us who were sort of maybe more introspective, like artists and journalists, and maybe kind of had the same living situation, you know, we just didn't know if we were to make it, you know, through that year, you know, a lot of us, just generally speaking. So it was like, why not, you know? So just go for it. Like you don't, you know, anyway, I don't know how else to explain it. Something felt very like, in the trenches, a lot of my journalist friends and I,
I mean, that definitely came across. Watching this film, I mean, kind of going off of that, watching this film, two words that really came to mind for me were both proximity and risk. And, you know, this year, you know, even though this film really takes me back to that time, it's also a year that I spent mostly behind a screen, or, you know, experiencing all of this from a distance. And, you know, thinking about this divide as something like, I think in our minds, maybe even we like create a spatial geography of like a division, like literally, but in the film, there are so many different ways that you show the proximity of all of these different groups, just like together physically in spaces, but also like the way you use sound to bring different kinds of voices into different spaces at moments, and then also your proximity to, you know, proximity of bodies together in this pandemic, but also like the proximity of you to your subjects, and like the risk that involved with the guns, but also in the midst of the pandemic itself, and all of these people risking their own health to like show up and be a part of this conversation. So I don't know, those two words really came to mind. And so I was wondering if you could like talk about, that experience of kind of being in the trenches, and also this feeling, you know, of like being with people in these spaces, given like the intensity and the risk everyone was taking at these times.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, it's funny because I had, you know, I was getting ready to do the mix last like November, the sound mix. And so I had to go back, and I was kind of being a purist. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go all the way back to the Capitol and record sound. And I was just expecting to some people still be lingering there, because that's how every day in 2020 was. It was like, and there's the gang with their ARs, you know what I mean? And there just wasn't anyone there. You know, it was like, oh man, it really is, you know, this is in the past. I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but it was just astounding how much that space had been transformed, right? Like it was such a different historical moment. And again, I talk a lot about, I met a lot of photojournalists and people like that year, because we were always, there, even in some of my shots. Some of them got really depressed, like the following year, like that being with everybody made me feel so alive, like being in these conversations with the different, groups, and actually finding surprising overlap. I mean, that's, I'm biased, but that's what I kind of love about this place in general, is it always keeps me on my toes, because I can't assume, In proximity, it is something that, I don't know, can happen in documentary, that I think that I've been doing this a long time, and I don't know, it's like this, and I don't know, I don't have an answer yet of like, why am I just talking to people that I might never see again, and yet I can't forget these people for years, sometimes 15 years later, I'm still thinking about that conversation. So I'm still thinking of an answer to that one. Yeah.
Not really a question or a comment, I guess.
Well, thinking about truth, I mean, that's something I was struck by, that you've created a documentary, your political diary. This is memory on one level. You've documented a really contentious moment in Michigan's history, especially with the plot against the governor, the Stop the Steal, the lawsuits, getting this very intimate footage of people on both sides of the election and, COVID denial, vaccine, all the things, right? So you've documented something, but it's in a time when many of the people you documented are denying the same, that we actually are even living in the same world. And so when I look at your film and I hear people making claims about what does the Constitution say, what do the actual rules say, and they are living on different planes. How do you, as a documentary filmmaker, think about how some of the different people you interviewed might even read your film?
Yeah. So a number of people in the film have seen the film and participated in events and stuff like that. Taylor, that was also a tricky edit. The mustache. I'm sorry I've referred to it, but it is an amazing mustache. Yes. Because there's a lot of people in the film, so I'm just, he's the one with the mustache. But it was a tricky edit in the sense that, of course, there's the pressure to really cut it down, and I'll probably be revisiting that scene in the other film I'm working on, which is completely uses sort of very different, modalities. But letting his views unravel and to reveal the utter inconsistencies, right? And like, Trump's all, no, I'm not a big fan. He's all right. You know what I mean? Like it's so, I don't know, normal, actually. I come across that so often. But also this way where he's, it was very complicated, because I think where he began in 2020 and where he ended were kind of two different things. But it's tricky because, I don't believe that story of the American Revolution, that only 3% father, you know what I mean? But is this the news? Do I have to interrupt him? Is it immediately a Facebook fight? You know what I mean? Or am I going to let it, or do I let it play and then have him, eventually go push back at him, right? But then also his argument falls apart in and of itself, this sort of like, well, the jury and whatnot. But I think like, so obviously that brings up the question of like, how do you deal with platforming? Is this platforming? When do you have to immediately interrupt and correct, or Are you trusting your audience? And at least in this film, it's a conversation with and trusting my audience. You know, it's not a Netflix film. You know what I mean? So like they would be like, can you be cutting every 30 seconds? So it's, that interview was tough in some ways. And that, you know, I should, to your last question, I did with that when I went to his house, because I'm going alone, hello, and he has weapons. So I did kind of bookend that visit like you would with, you know, your parents or something, and say, I'm arriving now, so if you don't hear from me in 3 hours, you know what I mean? Call the cops or something. Because, you know, I'm in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, you know, unfortunately in this country, we only have 2 viable parties to choose from. For 300 million people, that's a travesty. You know, most countries do not have that. So this sort of 2 sides is kind of, most people in the film are expressing an utter frustration with that, you know? So anyway.
How did he react to the film? You said he's been at a couple of the showings or has been at events.
Not him. No,
not him.
No, he has
but
not
other
seen
folks.
it yet. Fred, who was the Biden sign guy, he, you know what I'm talking about? He has all the Biden signs in his house.
The person who lives in the one house by the road.
Yeah.
Got it.
He's a big part of the uncommitted vote movement now. He's he's very passionate about that. He came to our Detroit Institute of Art screening, and you know, was very vocal about feeling really, you know, frustrated and angry as a Muslim American. Jim, the newscaster, also has come to a couple screenings, and he's, I mean, they're all very supportive and positive of the film. The founder of Detroit Will Breathe was also at our Ann Arbor screening. He was great. He's, you know, become a friend. And then other people have seen links because they might not be in the area anymore and stuff like that. So it's been pretty positive. But like, just like, you know, we've been talking, like, it really brought me back, you know. So.
So we'll probably open it up for questions in a minute, but I wanted, just going off of that, it really brought me back feeling like how watching this film now from our present moment, which is obviously we're like having an election with the same 2, no, not the same 2, sorry, the vice president of, anyway. Yeah, I know it was. It was the same 2 a couple months ago. Anyway, but how are you? Yeah, how do you see this film now? How do you see like the conversations that are unfolding? What do you think its impact is, or what do you hope people are taking away from it in the present moment?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time. So it premiered at True False back in March. And it screened a month ago in Kosovo. That was its international premiere, where it won an award. It was very exciting. That was, you know, there were barely, I think there were only 2 Americans in the audience. So that was a really fast, and, you know, Harris had just become the nominee like 5 days before. So this is the first time it's been shown in the U.S. since our candidates changed. So I've been thinking about that, but I also, you know, was reading the open captions, I'm like catching mistakes, so I was a little distracted with some of our. I'm like, dang, we got the word wrong there. But it's hard. I mean, it's hard to say, but I think I'm still registering the frustration, right? And this sort of like, you know, I hope that people will see the people, you know. I mean, there's some people that are like, yeah, they're for Trump, you know, but because that frustration or their, you know, kind of plights doesn't. It's not like that's going to drastically change no matter who wins or is the candidate, you know. There's shifting planes, you know. I don't know, but it doesn't. I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, for me, once the election happens and the after election is always the scariest part of the film. It's the most like, oh, God, now we're 2 months away from this. So what's going to happen? So.
Well, I think we should open it up for questions now. And if you do have a question, if you could just wave to one of the nice people holding microphones in the aisles, and they will come over and give them to you.
Hi.
Hi, Ben.
Wow, what a moving film. So insightful and revealing. You mentioned that Taylor's kind of views on things might have changed over a few years. I think it's probably true for all of us as things happen, but I'm curious.
Just over the year.
Okay, over the time that you were with him. How have things changed for you from the beginning to this place? You've been on this huge journey making this film, and I'm curious what, if you were, it's a diary, how have you changed from reflection on this?
Have I changed by making the film, you mean, maybe?
Your political views.
I mean, I think there's an inspiration to continually go out there with my camera, and then there's the drive to finish it as a film. But this was also initially part of another film. It was just the last section of this 7-part feature I've been working on, more experimental. But then as 2020, originally the end of that film, which I had started like more than 5-6 years ago now, it was going to be done with conservative, it was going to be based on using actors based on interviews I'd done with conservative and liberal militia. But then as 2020 happened, I was like, okay, one, dealing with actors and COVID, expensive, and I can't handle that. Just like whatever. And also like, who needs fiction? Just go home to Michigan, with everything that was going on. And then I was just sort of, I think I just pick up a camera when I'm trying to figure something out, when something is compelling to me. Not compelling in the like ambulance chasing way, but just like as a human being sharing the earth with you, I need to understand this, because this is kind of defying what I'm presented, on my channels of information. And I'm still there. I mean, I think the film made me more hopeful because in all of, I see a window of opportunity with a lot of these people to find new allyship and an opportunity to like converse, which is not something we often give each other and our cultural, our discourse culture. And I say all of this as like, somebody who's, I've canvassed in every election in Michigan since I was 18. And I just think like, there's privileges that I have as a white person that I can go into certain communities and a Trump rally and converse and have a conversation and try to deeply canvas, right? And it's not canvas all the time, but you know what I mean? So, but that's been there for a long time. And it makes maybe life a little bit more difficult because I'm not towing the line all the time. Yeah, but I just think long term, we have to keep on, doing the work, right? Not just assuming we're just going to win and we're always right? So.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate that you, in your filmmaking and choosing the shots, I noticed there's a commonality in keeping folks' humanity. So I guess I was just wondering, how do you, is there a process you go through, or is there something that you look for in a scene or on deciding that tells you, or like a little blinker or something internally that you then tells you this will remain? Because I think that's sometimes really hard to translate in a film. Mm-hmm. How do you do that?
You mean how do you know when to film, maybe, or just more
so the portrayal of humanity. How do you choose what scene, what part is going to stay that will keep that humanity intact?
So the crazy thing is so everything except one scene that was shot before the election is in the film. My first film was about my family, and my shooting ratio was also good in that film. I think because I always knew kind of like, oh, they're about to go here emotionally, because you just know them so well. And there was a bit of that going on that year, just my emotional antenna, I think, just because I was so isolated in my head. I was like, I just kind of sort of knew where to go. I don't know. Or just, there was something about that year. The only scene that didn't make it in the film, because I really wanted to avoid any political figures, it's because I really wanted to make it about the people, was a rally with Kamala Harris in Detroit. So it was great, but it was just a different tone or kind of material. But I think, I try to I take a long time to edit. I could never make a living as an editor because I'm so slow. It's like take a pass, because otherwise the pressure to like sound bite and like cut it down and get this little takeaway, but then that is where you are sucking their humanity out, right? Like, there might be 5 conflicting truths, the inconsistency that makes us all human, right? And keeping that in, even with Taylor, is important. Even though I very much disagree with him, but I wanted to show that, and at least he has some time to make his case, even though it's sort of rambly and inconsistent, like again, probably I am right now. So yeah, I don't know. I try, that's really important to me, is to like the anti-soundbite. I was actually told my colleague they wanted me to teach documentary next semester. I'm like, I'm kind of an anti-documentarian right now. I don't know. So.
Hi there. Thank you very much for being here today. My name's Lona. I'm a local official, elected official.
Thank you.
That's not the reason I brought it up, mostly because I was keyed in very much to the caravan that happened, because elected officials around here experienced that a lot. And of course, we were also dealing with the murder of George Floyd very locally here. And so I'm curious to ask you, when you had so many converging concerns, what helped you decide what about the conflict related to the Black Lives Matter movements and the conflict related to the anti-COVID movements and the election, what made you decide how to divide those up? Because this was definitely not a third, obviously. So I'm curious about what you chose to leave in there and out, and especially with that caravan, that was a very local thing. Like it was, it helped, it resonated with me to see all of this national stuff come very locally and into a neighborhood. And so I'm curious about how you decided to how you made the decisions about how to include those. And then the last very quick question, I want to know what you did with the masks you bought. Because I found that striking. Like, I could never give my money to somebody who was doing that, like, because of where I sit on the political spectrum. But I really appreciated that you did that, and I felt like maybe I should be a better person. I don't know. So I'm curious what you did. Yeah.
I genuinely thought she was very nice, and just like what she says is just like, it's just standard fare. Like, I'm watching all these ads pumped at us in Michigan. I'm sure you guys are the same. And I'm just like, this is, she's a real, she's a real human being. But, even my mom, it's inevitable. People kind of sometimes like just get stamped with some of the beliefs, right? So, I don't know. I have a job, and I don't have to go sell things at a rally to make a living and feed my 5 kids. Like, yeah, I'm going to buy, I don't care. I'm going to buy some masks. It's a mask. And they're still unopened, and they're in the bottom of my car. They're still there. Does anyone want them? I'll mail them to you. Yeah, it was, and I wasn't, I included it because there was all kinds of things, just like, and maybe to your question, it also shows not just like, oh, I'm such a good person, but also like, oh yeah, Michelle. No, I go by Mitch, and some other things, right? Like I'm nervous. Yeah, all nervous to admit I canvassed for Biden. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sort of nervous and flawed too, and not completely consistent. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I don't know. It just, yeah. And there was also something almost like biblical about that, like the traveling, just like, I don't know, just 8 centuries old. And then your first question was about events. And sorry, I thought you said you were an elected official. Not that they're, oh, you are, okay. Or not elected, election. Okay. Yeah, because, like, I know. Wow. They're doing the Lord's work there. But how did I choose what events? People would just tell me where to go, and I showed up. I didn't know what was going to happen with that caravan. And, I really wanted to keep that in the film. At moments it was difficult, but I think like putting that context of like, again, this is how we found community, like just put it in context a little bit. But I mean, those are also the causes that I protest with and support alongside, right? And again, I'm trying to understand and also kind of fulfill like a calling that a lot of filmmakers have, especially filmmakers of color, like white filmmakers. Can you go and figure out why people are voting for Trump? So some of more the pressing query is there, of like, okay, what is there room, like.
I think we have time for one more question.
From your experience, what about Trump resonates with these voters? I heard freedom and abortion, but there is a viscerality to their support that's so much more potent than for any other candidate.
Well, did you notice that at the Democratic convention, freedom was quite a thing? Like, we borrowed from that, I think the analysis was like there was a lot of like emphasis on freedom and patriotism. I mean, I'm more interested and intrigued, not by like the I'm more intrigued by the voter who is frustrated, doesn't like sort of either side or either candidate or whatever. But then once pressed is like, I guess I'm gonna go vote that way. I categorize myself as independent, such like that. It's more complicated than a simple answer that a mere documentary filmmaker can provide, I think, and it would be overly encapsulating. And I also think we're in kind of a realignment time. It's this summer was crazy, just politically, just the rapid fire of events. So who knows? But some analysis puts this out there of just like the urge for something new, which, might give the left, the upper, a greater chance this time, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, what is the appeal of Trump? Is that what you want to know? Can I say one thing? At the Trump rally, I kind of understood it for a second. It felt like I don't know, like a church revival meets a strip club. It was such a huge tent. And I was just like, okay, this is actually sometimes more embracing than like we can be, right? I still don't understand what's happening here, but it was a little bit no judgment, Is that what happens on Fox News? No, right? But I'm just registering a vibe. But again, I'm not a political analyst.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this film with us, Mitch. It has been such a pleasure. Catherine, did you have any final thoughts or questions?
I'm still trying to wrap my head around church, revival, strip club, AR-15s, and the rest. But I do like, I always like to end on a hopeful note. And the idea of how this film demonstrates your ability to stay in the moment with people and let it unravel or ravel without it getting to the point of the scene on election night where you have the countdown. I think there's such a great contrast between your intimate moments with individuals and that extreme moment of discursive violence with and it's a vision of a different way of trying to pick apart what's happening. And so I think that's really hopeful. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Bridget. Thank you.